If a song makes you cry but an algorithm wrote it, did it still come from a soul? Or perhaps from us, collectively, kind of harvested from the data stream? Welcome to another My Mind MashUps deep dive, where we unravel mysteries, spark curiosity, and make sense of complex ideas together. Today we are taking a deep dive into, well, probably the most contentious topic in modern culture right now: AI, authorship, and the whole future of creativity. We're aiming to move beyond just the hype, to really understand the specific mechanics of machine expression, the critical legal battles that are defining ownership, and the big philosophical implications of art without intent. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you enjoy content that makes you think. The anxiety we feel right now, this sort of creeping dread that unique human artistry might be, rendered redundant by a neural network, it feels really profound. But when you look at the source material, what's kind of surprising is how perfectly this panic fits into history. Our sources frame this as the latest iteration in a Sisyphean cycle of technology panics.
Oh, absolutely. It's a recurring feature of technological progress, really. Every time a new tool comes along and drastically reduces the effort needed for some specialized task. The existing practitioners, well, they often declare the end of art as we know it. Their fear is completely understandable, I think, because it directly challenges their status, their training.
But isn't the current panic different? A camera couldn't write a novel back then. Now AI writes songs, scripts. Doesn't that make the historical parallel feel a bit weak?
That's a fair question, yeah. But the underlying motivation for the resistance, I'd argue, is pretty much identical. It's the democratization of skill. Think back to the 19th century, when photography first emerged. Painters properly panicked. They saw the camera as this huge threat to their livelihood, which was built on centuries of, specialized technical skill.
Right, suddenly the high art of painting seemed almost obsolete if a machine could just capture perfect realism instantly.
Exactly, but there was this painter, Antoine Wiertz, who argued back in 1855 that the camera only kills the work of patience and pays homage to the work of thought. He saw that the machine actually freed them from the purely mechanical execution bit. And this ultimately helped launch painting into movements like Impressionism, where concept, emotion, abstraction, those became paramount over just replication.
And we saw similar resistance in music too, didn't we? I remember reading about the initial, outrage over synthesizers.
Yeah, it's outrage, yes. When drum machines and synthesizers arrived, the British Musicians Union actually tried to ban them back in '82. They feared they'd replace entire orchestras. But of course, those tools became fundamental instruments in their own right. They augmented human sound design. They didn't just replace it entirely. Our sources consistently show that this historical resistance, it often stems from new tech threatening these hierarchies built on specialized, high-effort training. AI is just the newest example of tech lowering the barrier to entry.
Okay, so before we can really decide if a computer is an artist, we probably need to look under the hood a bit. What is it actually doing when we ask it to create? I think a lot of people maybe assume AI is like struggling with ideas like a human does.
Yeah.
But the mechanics are much colder, right? More
mathematical. They are purely mathematical and statistical, yeah. They lack consciousness, they lack human intent. We can sort of demystify this by breaking generative AI down into its two main forms.
Okay, let's start with text then.
Right, so that's large language models, LLMs, like GPT. They're trained on absolutely vast data sets, sometimes trillions of words. When you prompt them, they generate text by statistically predicting the most likely next word or sequence of words based on all the patterns they've ingested. They're basically, extremely sophisticated autocomplete engines. They don't grasp meaning, they just understand probability based on the data.
So if I ask it to write a perfect sonnet in Shakespeare style, it's not somehow channeling the bard. It's just imitating the statistical linguistic patterns it found in its training data.
Correct. The text can be incredibly fluent, but it's fundamentally devoid of the lived experience or the emotional context that gives human language its, depth. Then the second major type is diffusion models. These are the image generators like DALL-E or Midjourney. You give it a prompt, and the system literally starts with random noise, like TV static. It then iteratively denoises that static to form a coherent image that matches your prompt, all guided by the patterns it learned during training. They don't copy existing images, they synthesize new visuals by blending and recombining learned concepts.
Okay, so this statistical mechanism, that's the crucial difference when we compare it to human creativity. If AI is generating novelty through this sophisticated remixing and prediction, how do we then define what the human brain does? What makes it creative?
Well, human creativity is fundamentally associative and conceptual. We connect really disparate concepts, external stimuli, emotions, and critically lived experience. That's how we produce original metaphors or non-obvious ideas. We can achieve what's sometimes called conceptual slippage, connecting things that statistically just don't belong together. AI, on the other hand, excels at interpolation in latent space, which means it finds surprising novelties, but generally within the established boundaries set by its training data.
Okay, so the machine predicts what is likely to come next based on all that data, whereas the human decides what should come next based on intent, purpose, feeling, insight, that kind of thing.
Precisely. And this statistical boundary, this lack of genuine human intent, is why our legal system is drawing such a clear line on authorship right now.
Let's define that line then. Traditional copyright law, it requires originality, right?
Yeah.
And that originality has to stem from a human's creative intellectual effort. So if a machine does the bulk of the creation, where does the law actually place the credit? Or does it?
Well, the U.S. Copyright Office, the USCO, has been exceptionally clear on this so far. Their stance is, if a machine produces the substance of the work pretty much automatically from a prompt alone, that's considered purely mechanical generation. It's not seen as human expression, and therefore it's not copyrightable. The whole point of copyright is to reward human labor and creative decision-making.
And this stance, that sets up the huge conflict we saw with that famous artwork, Théâtre d'Opéra Spécial. Can you tell us about that case? Why is it so important?
Right, this was that Midjourney image that actually won a digital art competition back in 2022. And the human creator, Jason Allen, he spent significant time on it. It wasn't just one prompt. He wrote, I think the number was over 624 iterative text prompts, refining it, and then he did subsequent edits and upscaling in Photoshop to get the final piece. Sounds like a lot of creative effort, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So why then did the USCO deny copyright registration for the core AI-generated image itself?
Because they judged Allen's contribution to the generation of that core image to be de minimis, basically negligible, relative to what the machine actually executed based on the instructions. Even with all those prompts, the substance of the image itself was still seen as being generated by the AI. This precedent is monumental. It effectively tells artists everywhere that the copyrightable value isn't necessarily in the initial generation, even with complex prompting, but potentially in the final selection, coordination, and arrangement of the output.
Okay, so here's the key takeaway then, maybe. The USCO ruling seems to imply that copyright protects the curation and the creative control over the output, not just the initial generation or the prompting itself.
Absolutely. Authorship essentially shifts, or seems to be shifting, from direct creation in the traditional sense to more of a high-level direction role. The human has to be the editor, the refiner, exercising clear creative control over the selection, coordination, or arrangement of what the AI produces. This is where this new skill, prompt engineering, comes in. The artist becomes more like a high-level creative director.
If this is resonating with you, definitely hit that subscribe button so you don't miss our next deep dive. Okay, let's shift gears a bit now and get maybe a little philosophical. If an algorithm can generate, say, a beautiful sonnet or a melody that genuinely moves us, does creativity actually require consciousness or human experience? Does the product stand alone, or does the internal why behind it still count for something?
That question really takes us to the heart of the whole debate, doesn't it? Margaret Bowden, who's a renowned AI researcher, she suggests AI can achieve novelty and value. She calls it exploratory creativity, which is basically finding surprising combinations within a defined conceptual space. But she argues, if true creativity requires intent, consciousness, and understanding the art's purpose, then current AI still falls short.
Right, so we might be impressed by the technical complexity, but maybe we still feel the lack of a conscious hand behind it all.
Douglas Hofstadter takes this even further. He argues quite strongly that current LLMs, no matter how fluent they seem, they lack the depth, the self-awareness, the authentic and reflective voice of thinking, living human being. For Hofstadter, creativity without consciousness is basically counterfeit. The machine can rearrange language very cleverly, sure, but it doesn't feel or understand the meaning it transmits.
That kind of reminds me of Brian Eno's take, the musician, right? Which is surprisingly critical, actually, given his own history with electronic tools. He compares AI art to, what was it? A dog walking on its hind legs?
Yeah, it's a classic Eno quote. He says the wonder isn't that the dog walks particularly well on its hind legs, but that it can do it at all. So the value we attach to it is tied up in the context, the fact that it's a non-human doing it, rather than purely the intrinsic quality of the art itself. He argues really passionately that the human context is inseparable from the art's cultural weight. He says, and this is a direct quote, "The backstory matters, the event matters, the intentions matter."
We seem to need that sense of struggle or risk or purpose, something human, to really attach deep value to the work. But hang on, not all creators are resistant, are they? Some are actually embracing collaboration in ways that completely upend traditional copyright. I'm thinking of Grimes, for instance, who proactively offered that OpenAI voice license.
Oh, her response was genuinely revolutionary, I think. After AI tracks using clones of other artists' voices started getting taken down, Grimes basically said, go ahead. She offered to split royalties 50-50 with anyone who created successful songs using AI models trained on her voice. That completely flips the script on infringement.
Wow, so she effectively turned potential infringement into a kind of collaboration,
Yeah.
and maybe even a new revenue model.
Exactly. She's effectively saying, look, if you can clone my style successfully with AI and it works, let's monetize the output of my AI likeness together. It transforms the role of the artist, potentially, from being the sole generator into more of a franchiser, maybe, curating and commercializing their own artistic persona through AI.
So, okay, if the technical quality of AI art can be perfect, or near perfect, why do the sources suggest we still struggle to accept the AI product on its own terms? Is this about an authenticity deficit, as some call it?
It seems to be almost entirely about human provenance, yeah. We crave the human story behind the art. There's staggering evidence for this from attribution bias studies. These studies show participants consistently preferred and valued artworks, music pieces, whatever. Things they believed were made by humans, even when the aesthetic quality was objectively identical to an AI-generated version they were shown.
Hold on. So I would rate the exact same painting as more creative, more awe-inspiring, and worth more money simply because someone told me a human made it.
That is precisely what the research confirms time and again. Just the human-made label led people to rate the work significantly higher across the board and even express a willingness to pay more for it. This bias, sometimes called algorithm aversion, seems strongest among people who perhaps view creativity as the last fortress of human supremacy. Once that belief is challenged by AI, the perceived value tends to drop sharply.
So we value the journey, the perceived struggle, more than just the destination, the final product. We want to know that the person behind the work maybe struggled or felt something real.
It seems so, and the consensus emerging is that AI art often feels, well, hollow to many people because it lacks that uniquely human labor, risk, emotion, and intentionality that traditionally gives art its soul or backstory. This strong cultural preference for human provenance is now actually driving legal developments too. There's an emerging ethical and legal consensus. You see it in things like the EU AI Act demanding transparency. People want to know. Surveys show something like over 80% of people agree that AI-generated content, like songs, absolutely must be clearly labeled and identifiable.
Okay, let's look ahead then to the future horizon. If we manage to move past the panic phase and accept AI as an essential integrated tool, what does the creative landscape maybe look like by, say, 2030?
Well, the projections point towards radical augmentation, definitely, but also the serious commercialization of synthetic identities. Gartner, for instance, projects that before 2030, we'll likely see a blockbuster film where maybe 90% of the content, visual, script, music is AI-generated. The human role in that scenario becomes almost entirely conceptual oversight and final curation.
And commercially, you mentioned synthetic personas. The shift away from human talent in certain areas seems to be accelerating towards these virtual beings.
The growth there is explosive. The virtual influencer market was estimated at over, $6 billion in 2024. It's projected to surge to nearly $46 billion by 2030. Brands, it seems, often prioritize the control, the consistency, and maybe the non-controversial nature of synthetic celebrities over unpredictable human talent. This pivot really shows where some of the highest commercial value of AI-driven creativity might be heading, deploying controlled, proprietary synthetic identities.
So for the actual working creator, maybe AI becomes less of a competitor and more of an algorithmic muse.
Exactly that. Future AI tools will likely be deeply integrated personal assistants. Imagine a tool that knows your artistic style, your preferences inside out, and it can generate endless drafts, variations, or designs almost instantly based on your direction. The human's core job will increasingly become about editorial judgment, refinement, and crucially, providing the intentional meaning, the why, that the machines simply cannot replicate.
So our sources seem to clearly point towards a future where creativity is very much man with machine. The enduring human value seems to shift away from manual execution towards concept, curation, and that core intentionality, the one thing the machine can't fake.
Yeah, the question really is no longer if AI can create, but maybe why we value creation in the first place and what parts of it are uniquely human.
And remember, every deep dive here is about sparking curiosity, challenging assumptions, expanding understanding. So here's a final thought to mull over. If AI can perfectly mimic an artist's style and even their emotional resonance, should we value the process, that human struggle and lived experience, more than the product, the potentially machine-made perfection? Like, comment, and subscribe to hear more My Mind Mashups deep dives. And please, drop your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective could genuinely shape our next deep dive.
Until then, keep digging into the details. Keep asking questions.
Find My Mind Mashups everywhere you listen. That's Amazon Music, Audible, Facebook, Pocket Casts, Spotify, TikTok, and YouTube.